The focus of this video is entering a new client record into the Hancock Energy software program for a WAP client. And the assumption here is that this client has never been entered into the Hancock program before for any reason. So to get started, we're going to first get into Hancock and we're going to navigate to the client management screen, which I've already done. And we're going to double check that assumption that this client has never been entered before for any reason. So we've already typed in the last name and the street address, and that's performed a search and verified that there are no records available that matches this information. So we're good to go and add a brand new client from scratch. The reason that you didn't get to see those first couple of steps in real time is we were trying to protect client confidentiality to ensure that real families who would have showed up in this when we first navigated to the screen didn't appear for a video that would be somewhat broadly distributed for trading purposes. So we've skipped those steps and hopefully you'll be able to navigate those without any issues. And once you've verified that this client has never been entered before, the first button that we're going to click is right here on this client list view screen, and we're going to click Add Client. And the first screen that's going to appear is a new screen in this version of the software. It's the Add Client Pre-Check Eligibility screen, and as the software continues to evolve over time, this screen will be increasingly valuable to tell us which of many programs a client may be eligible for versus which of the many programs they may be ineligible for based on a minimal amount of information entered about the monthly household income level and the number of occupants in the home. So at this point, we really don't have a reason to click the pre-check eligibility button. So we'll primarily be using the save button when we're finished working on this screen. The pre-approval reason, the first field here, will show us our auto qualifiers. And previously in the software, this was called categorical eligibility. So you'll see the same three choices that we've always had appear here if you click in the white space. So if this client received fuel assistance and was an active seasonal fuel assistance, we could select that. It's not quite intuitive that this still allows you to select multiple choices. Now that we have one indicated, if this client also received SSI benefits, we could click back into the white space and then go select SSI as well. So you still do have the ability to choose more than one when more than one choice would be applicable for this client. And if you don't quite have this information at this time, that's fine. You don't need to enter it at this point. There'll be another opportunity later on subsequent screens. And if you accidentally make a mistake and you want to remove something from the list, you would just click on these X's to bring it back to the default. So we'll go ahead, we'll enter SID and get this application entry started. And you will need to put in at least the information where there's a red asterisk in order to move to the next screen. But if you don't have the monthly income at this point, you don't need to worry about that. You can leave it at 0 if you want and enter it later when you do have it. For now, I'm just going to enter a phone number and the number of occupants. And then once we get to this point, we can go ahead and click Save. And everything that we've entered on this screen will carry forward and be saved onto the next portion. So what appears now is the new client information screen. So before, when we would enter clients, we would have to click through multiple separate screens to enter different information or provide backup documentation about the client application. Now what we have is one screen and a number of expandable and collapsible screen sections that can be adjusted to tailor your screen real estate how you prefer as you're making your entries by clicking the plus button to open or the minus button to close. So in this particular case, if we open the contact, we'll see that all of the information that we entered on the previous screen has transferred successfully. And at this point, we would want to enter the county. And this is a box that has tripped me up a couple of times, so make sure that you do click that before you try to save the screen for the first time, or you'll get an error message. So we've entered the basic contact information. In this case, we're going to assume that there is not a separate physical address versus mailing address, and we're just going to click the mailing address same as above box, and this will auto-populate. Now, at this point, you can pretty much draw a line in the screen here. Everything below this point is only applicable if you're working through a rental property situation. That's where you would have the ability to enter the property owner's name and contact information along with their address. And this last box down at the bottom is also only applicable in rental situations where the client who lives in the building is income eligible, but the property owner themselves is also income eligible. That's when you would check this box. So in owner-occupied situations, you would leave everything in this section of the screen blank when you're filling out a weatherization application in the new software. So we can go ahead, save some screen real estate, and open up the second portion of the screen. And what we're going to want to fill in now, and what's going to become a very important step moving forward so that we can differentiate who is on a waiting list for weatherization versus who is entered into the software for any other reason, including targeted high use or the emergency heating system grant program. We're always going to want to select a funding source in this drop-down titled pre-select funding. I'm doing this on a practice site using a state account, so I don't have any budgets entered in, so I'm not going to see our typical funding sources like HWAP or DOE. So we're just going to have to use our imaginations a bit and pretend that I'm picking HWAP here, and that's what we're always going to want to pick is HWAP as a pre-select funding source at this point in the application process. The applied date will default to the day that you're creating the entry, and you can always go ahead and backdate that if the actual application date was different. And then we also have a certified date field and an expiration date field. The certified date is something that you would type in manually on the day that you last certified the client to be income eligible for the program. And the expiration date will automatically default to 1 calendar year further along past the certified date. The categorical eligibility field is linked to that first screen as well. So if we had picked SSI or fuel assistance on that previous screen, it would have shown up here. And if we didn't pick it then, no worries, we can just do it at this point. And again, it works the same. If you click into the white space on the field, you get your list of choices. And then you could go ahead and make your selections, one or more selections. And the X's will take them away if you accidentally click them and didn't mean to. Now, at this point in time, we don't have a WAP rank. The application is not fully entered and there's not enough information to provide one, and the client status is showing as an incomplete application. If you're getting pieces of the application over time as a client gets nearer to being fully verified as eligible, you can go ahead and identify reasons why the application is still in an incomplete application status here in the reason box. So by clicking in the white space, it brings up a long list of reasons why this may still be in an incomplete status, and you can pick as many of these choices as you want. uh, when needed. And as they deliver things, the proof of ownership comes in the mail. You can start removing them from the list. The other thing that could happen is eventually, for various reasons, client application could be deemed inactive. So if you ever wanted to deem this inactive, you would just simply click the box, and then this same reasons drop-down list can be used to indicate why the client file is going inactive. If the client received reweatherization in the past, it's really important to indicate it by clicking this box here. This box used to appear on the audit information screen, and we're very happy to have it moved here because it's information that's much more applicable to the application process. And this box here, being checked or unchecked, is what is going to inform all reports that come out of Hancock about how many homes have received a reweatherization versus first-time weatherization services. So it's a really important box. So be sure to pay attention here as you're filling things out. And if you do indicate that this is a reweatherization project, then you would go ahead and you would type in the prior weatherization date in this field here. In Sid's case, he's applying for the first time, so we're going to go ahead and leave these blank. And we'll select the primary heating for the home, which is oil, and this is an owner-occupied single-family site-built home. And one of the new features here, before, people were doing a really great job tracking different client communications that happened along the way as clients hit different milestones, but we were limited to the number of characters that could be typed into the comment box. So now what we're able to do is we're able to type in comments. And at this point, if I wanted to save the record, which is always a good idea to do periodically as you're entering, I will save this. And hopefully sooner rather than later, the software will respond, and I'll show you how we're able to track comments a bit more chronologically as clients hit milestones over time. So this just date and time stamped the comment that I entered, and it pulled it out of the comment box. So now if a couple of days from now or a couple of weeks from now something else happened that was worth noting, you could go ahead and make a new comment, save it, and it would pull that comment up here under this one. It would provide the date and time stamp, and then the comment box would reset to blank again. So that's a subtle feature, but we're happy about that update. So we're going to go ahead and minimize application and move on to the energy consumption screen. So on the energy consumption screen, when you're creating a record from scratch, you'll see that there are no records available. This is what the screen will look like. And the way to start adding them is to click the Add New button. And what we'll do is we'll go ahead and put in the oil. You may be using an individual vendor's name. You may be using state average oil. Either works the same in terms of the pricing that's associated with that fuel type. And it's really your agency preference whether you want to track it at a more detailed level vendor by vendor. The date will automatically default to the day that you're doing the entry. If you would like to do this a bit differently, that's totally up to you. And will always be defaulted into a usage mode to display annual energy usage. And then we'll be able to type it into this box here. And it's really important just to note that what we're after as a program is the average annual energy usage, and the more history that you can calculate that average from, the better. More years of history is always going to be better and yield a more accurate average. So if you do have a number of years, please do take an average. Don't just look at the last year. And you'd go ahead and you'd enter that information in here. So 950 gallons. And if it's just the same name, in this case it is Sid's, we can click same name. If it's somebody else's name on the account, we could go ahead and type it in the box. And you could type in the account number or indicate that there is not one. And what's going to happen every time you first create these utility records or energy consumption records, all of the usage that you enter is going to default to heating. So in this case, we're going to want to just leave this alone, and it won't be until the file gets to the coach that they'll ever actually sit down and look at the bills and do some disaggregation to figure out what should go into other usage areas prior to discussing the bills during the coach visit with the client. So we can go ahead and save this record at this point. And now we'll see that this has started to populate with our utility records that we've entered. And similar to the new list screens, if you ever want to open one of these, you would just highlight it anywhere and double click, and that would open the record. If you wanted to delete it, you would check the box to the left, and then once that was checked, you would click the delete button. So right now we're just going to leave that alone, and we're going to go ahead and click the add new button again to put in the electric utility. And I'm just taking the shortcuts here, and you may be typing in more detailed information along the way when you're doing it for real. And again, it's always going to default everything initially to heating. So one thing that you're going to want to do if you're the person entering these application records and you're entering the electric account is you're going to want to click on base load. And then you're going to want to uncheck heating, so that at least during the application process, it associates all of the electric usage with baseload, and then the coach or the auditor later on can do disaggregation as needed. So we're done with the energy consumption, so we'll minimize that, and then we'll go to the family screen and the income screen. And before we do that, I just want to quickly show you the demographics screen section. So the demographics shows a number of things about the ages of occupants in the household or if they meet any other demographic criteria. And it also shows information about the household income. When we're entering clients for the emergency program or for other non-weatherization programs, we get to skip right over the family screens and the income screens. We don't have to do as detailed of an entry. We can just directly enter numbers into all of the relevant fields here, including a monthly income for the household. For weatherization, we're not allowed to take that shortcut approach. We have to enter more detailed information. And then once we do that, all of these boxes will auto-populate. So I'll minimize that and we'll go to the family screen and there'll be a prompt that should appear. So we see Sid's entered very minimal information. To open his record and edit it further, we'll double click. And we'll see this warning saying that data entered in the family section of the screen will override your ability to enter things directly in the demographics section. So just a reiteration of what was just covered. So we can hit OK here. And you can go ahead and type in the social security number. I'm going to skip that for purposes of the video. Type in the gender. We type in date of birth for all household members, which automatically calculates the age. And I'm going to show you something else about age in a moment. If the individual meets any of these other criteria, you would go ahead and check the box. So Sid was a veteran and he is not a new American, so we won't check that one. He is not disabled, but if he was, we would just simply toggle over to yes. And then one of the other things that the Department of Energy does ask us to report on if people do volunteer the information during their application is whether or not people are Native American. So the way to indicate that would be to go to the race screen, and the Native American is one of the choices. Other than that, all of these other fields are not required for weatherization purposes. However, your community action agency, as a recipient of a community service block grant, may have additional requirements for your weatherization department about some of this other information. But for weatherization program purposes, we've really covered all of the fields that are required. So we'll go ahead and save this. And now we can see that more of the information is populated. Same thing as the energy consumption screen and the list screens in terms of how this would behave if you wanted to edit or delete. Edit, double click, delete, check the box, and then push the delete button. Or add new. You can do this as many times as you need until you have all of the household members entered. So next we'll go to the income screen. And we'll go ahead and we'll again click the add new button. And we'll get another warning basically saying if you use this screen, you're not going to be able to direct enter a monthly income down below in the demographics section. And we'll hit OK. We know that this is how we have to do it for weatherization purposes. All of the family members that you've produced will show up as choices in this drop-down list. So this is a household of one, so we'll just have one choice. So we'll select Sid as the family member, and we will put in his wages for the year. So he makes $1,900 a month, so it's important to associate the amount with the correct frequency out of this drop-down list. And then we can go ahead and save it. Now at this point, we're ready to go back to that demographics screen and see how it's changed now that we've filled in the other screen sections. So number one for occupants, Sid does not fall into any of these age brackets. So these are all going to indicate 0. And you can see that we entered his monthly income. It's carried through here to the demographics section. It's calculated what his annual income is. And then based on his annual income, it's assigned him one of 5 poverty levels. And these poverty levels help us report out to the Department of Energy and other stakeholders to give indicators about who is receiving weatherization services in terms of their income in relation to the federal poverty line. So there's 5 different tiers that get reported out on. And you can see that based on the 950 gallons of fuel usage, he's been indicated to have high energy use here. So he'll be reported out in reports as a high energy use recipient. And then he'll also receive those 5 points in his WAP rank calculation for having high energy use. So at this point, let's go back and look at application. So we can see here that we still are indicating an incomplete app. We've actually done all of the required data entry at this point. The only thing that we're missing is the backup documentation. We haven't uploaded any documents yet. So it'll show incomplete app with no WAP rank until we fulfill those upload requirements. So we can go down here to the document section of the screen. And in this particular case, it's an owner-occupied home. He's applying for the first time, so right away we know that the rental agreement, the HUD auto eligibility list, and re-verification documents are not applicable. So we can check all 3 of those boxes and then change the status of all 3 of those all at once to not required by toggling to it in the drop-down list and then clicking the Apply Selected button. Okay, now for the 3 that are applicable, we can go over here to the first one, the application, and we can click to attach a file. And then we can select the file from our computer. and upload it. Then we can go to the next one. And another way that you can upload a file would be to actually go over and find a file, and you could physically drag and drop it in place. So for this third upload, when I click to upload it, I should be able to actually drop it right in here. So sorry about that. Technical difficulties at the end of the last video. So we're picking up more or less where we left off, entering SID sample, a weatherization client. So we've gone ahead and we've attached the third required attachment file. You can see that that is now uploaded here to the proof of ownership line. And now what we're going to want to do is set all of these required documents that do have uploads to complete, as opposed to either being blank or indicating not required. So we can do that by selecting all three of them at once, or we could go into them one at a time. To do them all at once, we would check the boxes to the left, which will then highlight the rows, and then we will do change status to complete, and we would hit the apply selected button. What's going to happen by default when these toggle over to indicate complete is it's going to give you today's date, the date that you're taking this action in the software, as your receive date. If you would like to edit that default, there are two different ways to do that. If you received all of these documents on the same day, then you could go ahead and check all three again, and you could do changed receive date. And hit apply selected. And that'll change those dates. If you ever wanted to edit any of these individually, the same double click action is what you would take to get into this document row. So if we got the proof of ownership a bit later, we could go ahead and double click here, and we could type in the date that we received that document as the receive date. And any notes that you want to have associated with these individual backup documents would need to be typed in from this expanded screen view, and then you would be able to click Save. So at this point in time, we should have all of our direct data entry requirements and our backup documentation upload requirements met. So the client should now be, for the first time, indicated as eligible, and we should be able to see what their calculated WAP rank is. So let's go back to the application screen section where those fields are found. Okay. And we can see now that the client has been changed from incomplete app to eligible, and the WAP rank was calculated at 16. One of the things earlier in the video that I had said we would come back to is the ages and the date of births on the family section of the screen. So before we do that, I just want to note here that we have a certified date typed in of 11/5/2018. So keep that in mind when we go back to this other screen section. Certified date of 11/5/2018. We'll minimize this. We'll go back to the family screen. And what we'll see is this is saying Sid with a birth date of 11/11/1981 is 36 years old. So that's actually incorrect if we think about how old Sid is today on December 3rd, 2018. He's actually 37 years old. But this is not an indicator that the software is working incorrectly. It's actually working exactly as intended. So all of the ages that are calculated are going to be calculated based on the certified date that's been entered into the software. So we want to make sure that people's ages aren't having to be recalculated every single day or every time somebody hits save on the screen, because we don't want the WAP ranks to be jumping around any more than they already do. If a child turns from 5 to 6 years old, for example, we don't want them to lose 2 WAP rank points, going from 5 points to 3. So there are things that we want to update daily, like waitlist points, but the ages, we want to make sure that they don't have a always moving target and are needing to be constantly recalculated, because that would really slow down the software's performance. So if you ever wanted to change it, the change would only be made if you're recertifying. So if a client has been on the wait list for a year or so, and prior to the coach going out to do the visit, you did all of your necessary client re-verification process, then you would enter a new certified date at that time, and it would recalculate everyone's age based on that new certified date. So we've gone through all of the screen sections on the new client information screen, except for the history section. So we'll do a quick tour of that. And there's no direct data entry on this screen, but we just want to show you what begins to populate down here. So the very first thing that you'll see is the first milestone that happens in the software is the application record gets created, and that'll be logged, and it'll log who the action was taken by in the software to get the client application created and the date of that action. I believe the next milestone would be when a job gets created. Another row would get created there. Over time, as we start to use this program, for months turning into years, and clients get services from multiple programs over time, we'll start to see a history build in here in the bottom part as well. So we'll see what past benefits the client received, and we'll see what day they received those benefits based on the job completed date for any given program. So that pretty much rounds out entering client application who has never been entered into the program for any other reason before, who is being entered for weatherization program purposes. So now if we click back to the client management screen, it's going to retain the same look that we had when we were last at that screen. So we had already typed in our search. So we had already typed in our search fields that we were looking for someone with the last name Sample located at this address, and now we see that Sid Sample does match that criteria, so he shows up. And there's a lot of information from here forward that we could get about this applicant without having to click through a lot of different screens to get it or to run reports. We could just keep scrolling across the client in client list view screen, and we would be able to see important things like WAP rank, client status, what building type, important dates, along with primary heating fuel and all of the different utilities and consumption that has been associated with a client record. So as you'll see, as you scroll across, you'll see an electric utility, and then you'll see the kilowatt hours. This is all kilowatt hours entered regardless of use. So it'll give you the total amount. It won't give you any subtotals by specific uses. If you're up in CVOEO's territory, you will get the natural gas utility on a lot of these and the corresponding therms. And again, that's not limited just to the heating therms, that's all therms, all uses. prior to any disaggregation that occurs. And then we'll see other utility, and this will be a list of every other utility that was added for the client, except for the electric utility and except for the natural gas utility. So if there were multiple other choices made here, then they would all show up on the list and they'd be separated by commas. So you may see wood, you may see pellets, and other choices here as well. And this MMBT usage field is going to show you how many MMBTUs were entered for all of the remaining fuels. So it's not going to give you usage associated with the electric utility. It's not going to give you usage associated with the natural gas utility. It's only going to give you all of the remaining usage. And again, it's not limited to just heating. It's everything regardless of use. So that's how those three work with each other. And then you'll see something that does hone in more specifically on heating. It'll just list what the all heating fuels that were indicated for the building. And if you ever wanted to get away from just looking at this one client record or any clients that meet the search criteria, you would click the Remove Filters button, and then it would bring you back to the default list. And the default list is set up to automatically sort from highest WAP rank to lowest WAP rank. So every time you click Remove Filters, it'll restore that default, highest WAP rank to low. All right, well, thank you very much. That concludes our overview of how to enter a client for weatherization purpose, along with a real high-level bit of information about what the columns, as you scroll across the new client list view screen, are referencing. Hope it was valuable. Thanks.